Good afternoon. I'm Flavia Rezende, Public Policies Coordinator at Ethos Institute. I welcome you all to join us at our panel about climate change and racial issues. This is the second panel regarding this topic. Last week, I had a great pleasure to talk to Elisabeth Jean-Pierre and Melania Canales. And today, I'm honored to talk to Mphatheleni Makaulul, Deon Shekuza, and Nisreen Elsain. I also would like to remind you that we are live at the Ethos Institute YouTube channel. Since last year, Ethos is reinforcing the role of the Brazilian society on facing climate change impacts through organizing the Brazilian Climate Change Conference. The main goal of this conference is to demonstrate that the Brazilian society is still committed to the Paris Agreement goals. We are still committed to our nationally determined contribution, therefore, to limit global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius, pursuing efforts to limit it to 1.5 degrees. The conference is a collective effort that involves almost 20 organizations that works with various aspects and topics related to climate change, including aspects of racial and gender challenges. I would like to thank the participation of Mphatheleni Makaulul, Deon Shekuza, and Nisreen Elsain. Mphatheleni is from the tribe VhaVenda in South Africa. In 2007, she founded the Mupo Foundation and Zomo la Mupo to promote confidence and empower people to protect their lands against local threats involving mining activities. In 2006, Mphatheleni joined Gaia Foundation and the African Biodiversity Network to reach solutions for local ecological challenges. Deon Shekuza is a young activist working on sustainable development issues such as the Sustainable Development Goals, the Agenda 2063, and interrelated development plans. Deon is very active within YOUNGO, the official youth constituency at the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Climate Convention on Climate Change. Deon co-founded the Namibian Youth on Renewable Energy, the UN Youth Namíbia program, and is part of the Super 30 Youth Voices. Is an environmental and climate activist since 2012. She studied physics at the Khartoum University in Sudan and has a master's in renewable energy from the same university. And she's the chair at the Sudan Youth Organization Climate Change and currently junior violence composes one of the aspects for our climate crisis and how this violence enhances inequalities and vulnerabilities at communities that historically had not contributed significantly to climate change. I would like to invite Mphatheleni, Deon, and Nisreen to reflect about basic concepts such as justice, climate apartheid, climate gentrification, and migration and refugees. So starting with Mphatheleni, I would like you to reflect on following questions. Why is it so important to defend and maintain traditional knowledge of indigenous people as well as the sacred lands? What are the main barriers and challenges indigenous people from South Africa face to keep their traditions in the realm of climate change negotiations and governance? I suggest we start with those reflections, then Deon and Nisreen can also share their thoughts, and we could go for a second round of questions in case we have time and if we don't have any questions from our audience. So Mphatheleni, please feel welcome to start. Thank you. Mphatheleni, can you hear us?
Yeah, now I hear you.
Did you hear the questions?
Can you repeat?
I was just asking you to talk about basic concepts related to the climate and anti-racist movements, and also share with us what you do in South Africa as a leader, as a woman leader, and how you work with sacred lands and also the maintenance of traditional knowledge and costumes in your tribe, in your society. Can you hear me now?
Thank you for the important life. I will start with this word which is all over the world. Knowledge system. As in a the E to English when it says indigenous is our lives. Renewal, meaning the way of life of indigenous people, which is the knowledge which originates with our ancestors. And we see this knowledge which originated with our ancestors has been lived as a generations that in us, whom we do not even know, but and now they go to the generation which will come after us. The generation which will come after us, like our children, our grandchildren, will continue to pass to the coming generation. That's how we see indigenous knowledge as an important concept. We here at VhaVenda, we have our organization as we have to organize ourselves due to the demand of the modern life, which is consuming this in called Zomola. Come to the concept of as the or from soil, from reptiles, from water, from the trees up to the stars, up to the moon. This understanding for us, it is from our ancestors. It is, and this is what we should also continue and transfer it to our
Mphatheleni, your internet is very unstable for us. We can't hear you. I will suggest we we come back for you later. Is that okay for you? I think I will just ask Deon to share his speak with us, and then we come back for you. Is that okay for you? Maybe the internet will get better soon, because we can't hear you. It's really cracking for us.
Very.
I'm sorry, but we can hear you. So I will just invite Deon to start his talk, and then we come back later for you. Okay, thank you, Mphatheleni. I'm sorry about that. So Deon, it's a shame we couldn't hear Mphatheleni. I thought that we could do like a dialogue, but this is not a problem, because I think you can share with us your own experience in Namibia. Could you share with us the main challenges Namibia faces today related to climate change, racism, and inequality? And how do you see that we will be able to overcome those challenges?
Thank you very much. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Can I proceed?
We can hear you really well. Yes, please.
So a brief country profile for Namibia would dictate that first and foremost, Namibia would be regarded as the driest country south of the Sahara Desert. And we would also have two deserts at the same time. We have the Kalahari on the eastern side, closer to Botswana, and then towards the west, we would have the Namib Desert, which is also regarded as the oldest desert in the world. So you're dealing with pretty much a very dry country. 23% of the country is often regarded also as desertified. So traditionally, Namibia is also, I would say, we are the third youngest democracy on the continent. We would get our independence right through the unfortunate demise of our cultural values, our human rights, and also just the ownership of our natural resources. And eventually that kind of like came from the apartheid government. So Namibia and South Africa, again, we share this apartheid legacy. And therefore, if you look at the Gini coefficient or numbers of Namibia, it's very similar to South Africa, which would also release us, or at least state us as one of the top five most unequal, in the top five of the most unequal countries in the world as well. So if you look at the SDG index of Namibia, the goal we are not doing good at, that we probably are not even touching a little bit on, is inequality. And if one can reference the Sustainable Development Report that was released by the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, in particular, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, he would highlight a lot around that. And traditionally then, the inequality in Namibia goes quite a long way because people were divided on homelands, and the further away you were from resources, the harder it was for people to survive. And until today, after independence, we still haven't reconciliated this entire process, and we are still buying land and selling it back to those who are, or leasing rather, our government leases this land for 99 years at least. So Namibia then came up with what's called a community-based natural resource management, which is one of the best practices in the world in dealing with community conserving their own resources, but at the same time also benefiting from them. And with that one being said, we tried, I would say it's probably our best example of how, in terms of sustainable development and the environment, vis-a-vis inequality, and racism and apartheid, is how we are trying to reinstitute our people back to ownership of the land, but coming through the lens of conservation and biodiversity preservation. Traditionally, we have a very mixed economic system, so that also makes it very difficult for the poorest of the people at the bottom who actually rely directly on the environment to have some type of benefit from GDP growth or developmental targets that we often set for ourselves. In putting it in perspective to our discussion today, I would obviously like to highlight that climate justice is very much an issue of ethics. And if one has to take into account a continent like Africa, this feeling is very nostalgic for us, the one of an existential threat, because we've been here before where we almost got wiped out. And now again, just when we come out of the claws of colonial and imperialism, we find ourselves back to the same position again of feeling like our lives are again a threat. And unfortunately, we also learn that we have almost nothing to do or little to do with the causes of such ramifications. And when then talking about climate change, one always has to consider the capacity of individual states to adapt and to mitigate. Having referenced the vulnerability of our country geographically, water-wise, drought, for example, has been one of our biggest challenges, and it often always impacts the lowest on the ground. In Namibia, if you go to the urban areas, you find that the race issue starts to come to unfold itself, that the ones who are actually feeling the brunt of climate impacts are the ones lowest at the bottom, and often the ones who rely directly on the environment. And at least a large majority of our agriculture is reliant upon rain-fed watering systems. And we've been trying to do drip irrigation and a few others, but largely if it doesn't rain, people actually have nothing to eat. Whereas here in the urban side of town, people have shopping malls, supermarkets, and stores where they can get a lot of access to food and sustenance. So for us in Namibia, it's also very difficult to deal with inequality when the constitution or the laws that were put in place did not consider such a threat of environmental issues eventually coming to unfold, and therefore our inequality safety nets and social security systems don't come from an environmental lens. And if you look at basic things like ensuring croplands for people, we would be very interested to figure out how that can work, ensuring that people have a reliable system upon which they can plan their crop productions, and also maybe see how they share their produce within and amongst themselves. So for Namibia, it's a very mixed issue, but the toughest part for us is apartheid, because it's still here. Because the contradiction for us is that, according to, then this is where I would like to link the international community to also consider how they test or measure or qualify a country. Like Namibia would be known, according to the World Bank, as an upper middle income country. And they basically look at the GDP, they look at the per capita, and then they obviously assume that that should be around the country in terms of distribution of wealth. But there's a huge disparity between that. And right now, with the worsening impacts of climate change, the government now has changed most of its priorities and look into issues like drought. And while we still have to deal with the inherited legacies of apartheid, such as employment, land, shelter, access to healthcare or education at the most, and that makes it difficult for these very young nations to be able to adapt properly to climate change. And when we then have to ask the World Bank to relook at those obviously they would only look at it from the statistical perspective, and then they lose sight of the fact that this country is one of those that inherit the apartheid legacies, and therefore there must be an inherent part of it that cannot necessarily adapt to climate change by its own device, and therefore would require international support. And you would see that Namibia is very active on trying to access funding for climate adaptation. I think we would be the first country to have an organization accredited with the Green Climate Fund. I think we were also the first to receive the Green Climate Fund readiness support. However, we still aren't able to access the bigger amounts that can help us do bigger projects like desalination and maybe bringing some parts of our desert back to life, because there's quite a lot of land we could use there. However, that's the basic profile of Namibia. And for me personally, working in this space, I have found the race issue to be a very subtle one that doesn't appear as often as one thinks it does, but it really affects how you present yourself. Because imagine if you are representing your country and the space in which you represent your country doesn't necessarily acknowledge the historical injustices that has been done by your country, to your country by others. It often makes no sense what you're trying to fight for it, because if you come to the international UN climate change conferences, it's very much a collective responsibility. But I like to highlight one principle in particular, the principle on respective capacity and common or differentiated responsibility. And that particular principle for me highlights the importance of considering in trying to fix the future or project the future. And coming from a youth point of view now, we have found the UN climate change space, in particular, the youth climate change movement. Let me rather use that one. We found it very close-knitted. It wasn't easy for us to break through. We found other young Africans or other people from these previously disadvantaged race groups who would also be part of it, but they didn't really break through. And so often, our representation was minor. We had very few of us at these conferences. And also, when we attend the conferences, it was also like a close-knit circle, so it was very difficult for us to proceed and make the impact and deliver the message that our people like for us to bring forward, like rural communities, indigenous groups, because we all have a couple of, in Namibia, we've got the San community, we've got the Obahimba community, and most of them still practice life based on their traditional means. But if you look, let me reference maybe the Green Climate Fund. It looks broadly at adaptation and mitigation. And the argument is that the funds will be split evenly between the two. But we all know that currently majority or bulk share of the funding goes towards a mitigation and little towards adaptation. And if you're talking about then issues like loss and damage, protecting and preserving these rural communities and indigenous groups, it's not that easy for one to get funded for such projects unless you obviously tie them in with other issues like mitigation and a broader sense of capacity building, awareness raising. But for us, I think we very much need to bring this issue to the global community to argue that if we don't look into what has happened in the past, it's going to affect us badly. Because if I can give a short history, we all agree that the industrial revolution of the 17th century, of the 1972, I think, was the time when they would get their first industrial revolution kicking off. However, as a previously disadvantaged person, I look at the industrial revolutions from an energy point of view to say that at the core of each industrial revolution was just the use of energy. And the zero industrial revolution is previously disadvantaged people, in particular Black people, looking at slavery and colonialism. And at that point in time, the kinetic energy from the people as they do massive work on the plantations and stuff like that. And eventually, when they discovered that they get the kilojoules of energy from coal, they would then abandon that and move towards coal. And then from coal, you would see they would move towards oil. And then from oil, they would realize they can also move towards electricity. And ours as a people, we've never been compensated for, one, the injustices that has been happening not only on our lands, because it's not only us as a people who are having this vacation, it's also the wild animal species, especially plants. We've got many invasive plant species down here in Namibia that are giving problems, like the particular cactus. And it's to question then, is that something that is considered in the whole narrative? Because us, as previously disadvantaged people, you can't break us away from nature. We come as a package. And so our environment and the people themselves are taking a heavy toll from climate injustices. And the fact that we contribute so little but receive also so little from climate adaptation, because my worry is also the Green Climate Fund, which is supposed to already have at least $100 billion by end of this year. I mean, I didn't Corona, but with or without Corona, that fund was still very much empty. So I'm taking it a bit slow because I'm coming from a point of uncertainty. I'm not too sure if this is even a subject that's going to be looked at eventually as an agenda item within the negotiations. Because if you look at the climate negotiations, the issues that matter to us, like loss and damage, are not necessarily wanted or at least supported. So coming at a local level, it literally means our government and our people need to fight themselves tooth and nail to protect their own indigenous, whether it's knowledge or resources. And that for me is something that, as a young person, I think needs to be considered, because we cannot continue. You don't fix these basics, it's going to be hard to meet the climate Paris Agreement targets or other agreements that we may come up with post Paris. And if you look at the young generation, they are also reaching a point where they are starting to question what is the relevance of all of this, and why is it that our culture and our customs and our values are often not considered. I like some of the language in the climate negotiations, like considering the special circumstances of Africa. Those are good terms. They kind of like saying something, but they are also not necessarily opening up a process for us to be active in. I think I have a bunch of other stuff I'd like to share, but just for the interest of time, I'd like to leave it there for now and also add after the other contributors and emphasize that we have done quite a good job as young people from the Global South, at least at the last 3 COPs, to bring in more young people from the South to actually bring their message themselves towards the spaces. And if you look at the climate change movement now, it is also, especially the youth climate change movement, it is also not in our hands as youth from the Global South. We are still very much looking up and very much still seeking some sort of validation or recognition for our work. And that for me is to question, like, are we not supposed to be the ones speaking on behalf of not only ourselves, but those who are not here yet and cannot speak for themselves a few years from now, perhaps when they come around, we would have these basics out of order. In order and not out of order as it is currently when it comes to this very intersectional discussion of race and climate change. If you come from the South and you indigenous person have a master's or a PhD, right? But this person actually understands the environment, yet it's very difficult for this person to influence literature, let me say, on climate impacts, because one, you come from a previously disadvantaged group that is not necessarily welcome to this discussion, and therefore, secondly, you are also not possessing the supposed certification. I won't say qualification, rather certification, because people are qualified to speak on the environment if you live there your whole life, but it's a very unique subject. I'd like to think I haven't seen much around this subject at the framework convention level happening, and of interest to all of us if the international community could start recognizing the importance of acknowledging what has happened in the past in order to fix for the future, because we cannot keep burying it and pushing it down further. Eventually, if you look at, let me say, the biodiversity, the global biodiversity framework that the UN Convention on Biodiversity, biological diversity is trying to adopt, you would find that some of the targets for how much land should be preserved that were proposed were overlooking the fact that maybe in some countries there's actually communities of people who live in those areas, and yet we are trying to preserve that with the argument of looking at it from a global perspective, because this global pressure sometimes overlooks local context. And I am one of those people who believes that the history of where we come from should be considered, because, for example, for us, as the colleague from South Africa mentioning, you would see that astrology, the cosmos, everything surrounds and binds our cultures together, and we don't separate one from the other. But yet, right now we're having, let me say, human-wildlife conflict that's giving us a lot of problems. Yet you wonder, how is it that years ago we could actually communicate with this wildlife? We had some type of relationship and trust, and today we cannot even have a fun ecosystem with this wildlife and the different species and interactions. And this conflict generates a lot through and because of colonialism and how they have completely disregarded the relationship between us and nature. And you see all these parks that have been set up, like the Kruger National Park. They would even name it after themselves. All of these parks then start bordering the way they bordering certain animals is out, the way they bordered the African continent from the 1885 or 1884 Berlin Conference that then would split up the continent. And as a young person, I'm very interested in environmental history, but not from a sense of how the environment is adapting, but in the sense of how we as the human beings have come to change the geomorphology of nature, how we've actually come to impact a lot of it based on our land use change and our development targets. But if you consider the aspect of inequality in a country like here, you would know that half of it has actually nothing to do with the locals, but they just inherited a system that is unequal. And then you throw on top of that a very pervasive issue that they don't see, but is right in their face, which is climate change. Then you realize that it could cause even more political pressure, because a politician cannot make it rain. A politician cannot resuscitate the soil. A politician cannot ensure that grow at full optimum. These are all variables dependent on the weather system and climate. And yet, in these particular countries, one, people don't understand the scientific concept of climate change. And two, they are also inheriting an unequal system. So that kind of like means we have a potential threat that could exist in these developing countries because of those issues being mixed, and the international community not taking a super interest to, one, acknowledge the past injustices and also support, come up with new mechanisms, new funding, what do you call it, funding budgets, if I can call it that, just specifically to address the racial and injustices that have happened, so that it can be a bit easier for smaller states like the one I come from to put money into education, health, but at the same time compensate back for what has been done to the environment. So it's a very mixed, broad issue. And as a young person, I'm glad to share that the youth from the previously advantaged or presently advantaged countries, some of them actually understand what we are through, but they don't know the struggle really of what it also means for you to find yourself at these places, to keep fighting for your people and bring, because if you are not in that room, probably nobody will even bring up that issue that you had to fly so many kilometers for, right? So it's very small issues, because the issue is underlying. Many people don't really see its importance. And for us as young Africans, we are very passionate in ensuring that the world actually understands. It is not so simple as when we come to these places and we fight, and because we're not speaking for ourselves anymore. Now it's way past Deon, it's way past Nisreen. it's basically about our people, and the survival of them literally depends on how much we fight for it. So for me, it's a personal issue. That's why you see I'm coming from a humble point of view, how I'm approaching it. Um, because I kind of like, I'm very sentimental when it comes to this issue, and living in a world witnessing the Black Lives Matter movement that just took place, you would really wonder if there is some type of consciousness around the injustices that are being done to us, and how much we have to really go through a lot just to bring forward these messages of solidarity. And yet you'd see that Africans or previously disadvantaged races are the most forward-looking when it comes to climate change. They're the ones who are pushing, they're the ones who are doing the most, putting in work. The little budgets they have, they put towards conserving the environment because they understand the reliance of their people on that. Spirituality is a concept that I think should also be connected, because for us it's a spiritual thing. We actually have a very deep tie with the environment, and what happens there's a symbiotic relationship. So what happens to the one affects the other. But if you look at the Western way of knowledge, it really includes that connection. It is very logical at most and lacks that spiritual metaphysical approach to it. And I think if we can start coming at it from those points of view, you'll realize that the race issue is deeply rooted as a humanity issue. It is always just the darker skin that's suffering the most, but it's to say it's basically our issue as human beings. So yeah, I think I will leave it there for now, and I'll jump in with the rest of the colleagues later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deon. Thank you for the brilliant introduction about Namibia, the main challenges. Also, the fact that you pointed out also the challenges at the global level, mentioning the Green Climate Fund. I think that for now, we can come back to all those issues later. I will try again Mphatheleni with us, and then we can also invite Nisreen to join us in this dialogue. Mphatheleni, can you share with us your experience in South Africa, and also talk about the role of women in your tribe, and also elderly people, the importance of the traditions, and also the meaning of Mupo for us, please?
Yeah, thank you. We cannot have well-being if we do not have elders who are knowledgeable about Mupo. And we cannot have well-being if we are disconnected from nature. That's why our organization, Mupo, we are the voice of the earth, we are the voice of Mupo. We cannot have well-being if we lose the connection with the indigenous forest. And the indigenous forest, we don't mean the trees which are standing there. We mean the whole area, the whole landscape, from the soil, reptiles under the soil, rivers, mountain, plants, trees, animal, insects, everything. It connects to us as a well-being. And we cannot have that knowledge, that experience as a life if we regard elders as uneducated people, as the people who cannot even read, as the people who cannot even sit in the parliament, as the people or the governance system according to the constitutions of the countries. Our life have well-being from those elders who cannot have that governance system which has been imposed to us. Like now, Zomolampo, we stand for protection of sacred site, because from when we are children, like myself, I'm 52 years this year, I have lived the life of indigenous, which the life of indigenous is our tradition, connected with water, connected with rivers, connected with our spirituality, which is done in nature, which our spirituality touches from food, from childhood, from when you grow up, from when you become an elder, even when you become a mother, you become an elder. The spirituality surround us coming from the indigenous forest. Then if we become disconnected with nature, with indigenous forest, we don't have well-being. Like now, because of the new governance system, of the parliament decision, which looks at the human being needs. They don't see sacred site as the indigenous forest with how the where even the rain connect with that place. They see the sacred forest as the source where there is gold, where there is coal, where they want to dig it out and destroy the whole forest. That's why for us, indigenous way teaches us and is a way of life which I can describe is indigenous life make us to understand things or to live life in a holistic way. Not that I get only water to drink for the people. Holistic ways through indigenous knowledge. It shows us the whole landscape, connect with everything which make well-being. That's why we say we cannot allow that they destroy sacred sites. But this is a huge struggle because when we say that the new governance system from the government, from parliament, they don't understand that because they don't look at what I have described. It looks only that human being has to have all the needs, which this needs does not even connect with spirituality, connect with the health, connect with the well-being all. It's only the money which people can have, which everything which they want, they have to buy it. But it's different to what as Venda people are. The Venda people, we are in South Africa, and we are one of the tribes in South Africa which are on the north. And Venda people, we depend on the forest. We depend on the soil, on the land. We depend on our spirituality. And this is the well-being of how we live well. But the whole South Africa has different tribes. These other tribes, also they have what I have mentioned. But for us, we stand up saying that everything is just taken away, is getting eroded, and we didn't have well-being. That's why we stand to raise these issues. And these issues, our problem is that the root of this disconnection is from the colonial mind which came here and disconnect people from what I have mentioned. And even when the apartheid continue to do that, even now when we say South Africa has democracy, the democracy of South Africa does not even embrace or respect the indigenous. They don't even talk about the indigenous forest as a key point. They don't even talk about the elders as the people who hold this knowledge which I mentioned. They only see to absorb other things which look at money, other things which look at people have to accumulate wealth of buying things, buying everything. And in short, this is why Mupo is standing against mining, is standing against destruction of sacred sites, mainly as our spiritual place. Because if we lose our spirituality, we don't have anything. We don't have life. And our spirituality, is most rooted on the sacred forest, where there is many spirituality from child birth up to when you grow. You start dealing with the problems which cannot be solved by these new things which is happening according to the people when they have the new way, modern way of that everything you buy it. That's why we stand that we cannot allow sacred sites to be destroyed. We cannot allow indigenous forests to be destroyed. We cannot allow that the elders are regarded as people. Children, we want them to learn from spirituality, from all this I mentioned, like sacred forest, and also the indigenous forest. As I repeat again, indigenous forest, we don't mean the trees. We mean everything, because this indigenous forest went from below the soil where they saw this mineral and works in a holistic way up to the sky, to the moon. And this is how our life is. I'm stopping there. Hello.
Okay. Yes, can you hear me, Mphatheleni? Thank you very much for this introduction about your traditions and explaining for us how important is this connection with nature and how challenging is to live in the world as it is today after colonization for your people. I will now invite Nisreen so she can share with us her experience as a young activist in Sudan. Nisreen, do you also want to share with us the challenges your country is facing now and historically? How are you overcoming those barriers? And how you, as an activist, as a young activist, and also negotiator, what is your opinion on all those issues? Please feel welcome to start your talk. Thank you.
Good evening for people who are in the evening time, and also good afternoon for the people who are in the afternoon time. And I'm sorry if it's a bit dark here because we don't have electricity currently. We are going through a hard time of power generation shortage, so we have to spend between 7 to 5 hours daily without electricity. Some days it's a daytime and sometimes it's a night time. And unfortunately, today it's night time, so it's very much dark. And I'm using another mobile torch to be able to be seen right now. Going through what my previous colleagues just mentioned, injustice and racism can take many shapes. It can take one shape within our countries, like my colleague from South Africa. Sudan lived very hard times with a dictatorship government for 30 years. We were able finally to overcome this dictatorship, and we had a long revolution in months, a lot of tears and blood, many mortals, unfortunately. But finally now we have a civilian government that can actually talk to, and you will not get arrested wearing trousers in the street like the previous regime. Injustice in Sudan and took many shapes. For example, if we talked about the injustice for women, especially and specifically, most of the women's had went through a very hard time. The previous regime rules and laws were actually against the women's. First of all, it was up to the policeman or the man of law to determine if what you are wearing is proper or not. You can go to jail only if the policeman or the man in law decided that what you are wearing is not appropriate. And there is no indicators for that. There is no dress code or anything. It's just left completely to the judgment of the person in front of you. Many of the journalists in Sudan were arrested also and tortured in the previous regime national security offices. We have a lot of people who disappeared, and until today we don't know if they are dead or alive. But finally that time passed, and now we are in a new era, more flexibility and more freedoms around us. If we are talking about the regional context of injustice, as Deon mentioned earlier, so some countries have historical benefits for being, for example, colonized for a longer time, or have a better infrastructure, or have high rules, and other countries that doesn't have these privileges are very much struggling in providing the basic services for their people, for example, health service and education service. Even within Africa itself, things are not very much clear. Many countries are taking advantage of many, but when we compare to and see clearly that African continent is in a very hard situation. Most of the famines happened in Africa for the last 10 years, last decade. Most of the higher rates of deaths, especially from famines and malnutrition, also happened in Africa. Higher children's our system is in Africa, and now COVID-19 actually revealed one of the ugliest also faces of injustice by being very far behind technologically, and talking about telecommunication and availability of internet. I also can very easily notice that young people from Africa are the least participation in many of the webinars and the internet events, because most of them doesn't have their own laptops, computers, smartphones, or they have it but they can't internet, or in my case they have it and access internet but they don't have electricity to charge it. Anyway, if we talked about injustice, then we have to open a lot of oozing bronze, let me say, and it will be only better and better by trying to speak loudly about the issues we are having and trying to think positive about it and have solution of it. Of course, political will is a key pillar in every advancing or in development. So unless we have the proper leaders in our countries, then it's very hard to do things. Most of you might know that Sudan separated into two countries in 2011, July 2011. And we live this memory with bleeding hearts every year. 9th of July is a very sad moment for for us or for the North Sudanese people. Also, the separation of South Sudan was part of the injustice and the racism that happens in the context. Also, the interest of different parties in the local context of the Sudan, and etc. Before the separation of South Sudan, we had more than 400 tribes, more than 200 in local languages and local dialects. After the separation of South Sudan, we have 200 tribe or something, and more than 100 local dialect and language. So within the very variable community and diverse community, it's a bliss, but it was not managed very well. That's why we lived in the civil war, the longest civil war, more than 40 years between the south of Sudan and the north of Sudan. And then I talk until after tomorrow about the issues in Darfur and how the Darfur conflict started from the beginning, and then how this regime dealt with it. But then I will not finish anytime soon. But as Deon said, the poorest who are depending on the environment and the natural resources are the most people who are suffering from the climate change and the effect. In Sudan, for example, even our GDP depends on the natural resources because we are agriculture and pastoral communities. So our GDP and production depends a lot on the rainfalls, on the weather. So if we had a heat wave or we had a flood from heavy raining, then we lose a lot of assets in Sudan. So even our government is struggling from the climate, not only the people. Something is very important to say is Sudan is one of the few countries where climate change actually started conflicts of resources. Many conflicts in Sudan, when you go the roots or causes of the conflict, you can find very clear that the conflict started because of the natural resources. The land cannot maintain the same stability for the people as it was. Water shortage is a huge issue and it can create a lot of conflict. People started migrating from the land, which are now very much desertified because of desertification, and they went to different lands, and then the original people who lived in that land started a conflict with them, because when you have outsiders and people coming from outside to share your rules with you, when you already don't have enough, then it's a huge problem. I can also highlight that most of the conflicts happen between the pastorers and the agricultural people, the farmers, because the natural equilibrium of the nature that their indigenous knowledge contained are not anymore sustainable. If you talk to any of the elder people, they can easily talk to you about the rainy seasons and how much rain is expected in these days and how much rain is expected in these days. And they had like a natural cycle where the pasture grew the agricultural land after the farmer, they cultivated the land and they eat what left from the crops and from small bushes. Now seasons are very different. Sometimes winter comes earlier, so the pasture have to migrate south earlier. So most of their cattle actually eat the product itself, and this product is what the farmer live on. They eat some and then sell the other to generate income. And so when the farmer killed the cattle, then the pastor killed the farmer, then the farmer tribe tried to start a conflict to defend their own son and blood, etc. It's a hell of a mess. And as Deon talked about loss and damage, we already lost a lot, and we will lose more in the future if steps was not taken carefully. Talking about the circumstances of Africa, now many people and many of the meetings of the UNFCCC itself was moved to be virtual meetings. We can easily judge, depending on how much meetings I attended, we can easily judge that Africa is the poorest when it comes to technological availability and access to internet. It's not stable at all, and whenever we have an internal meeting or an external meeting with anyone, then the line cuts a lot, and it's very hard for us basically to start any conversation virtually because of this. Touching what Deon said about accessing the Green Climate Fund, I'm not only going to talk about accessing the Green Climate Fund, but all of the envelopes. So if we talked about the clean development mechanism, if we compared how much Latin America or Brazil itself get from the clean development mechanism and how did most of Africa get from the clean development mechanism, we can see very clear injustice. Also accessing different envelopes of funds like the adaptation fund and the GCF, the GEF, the Global Environmental Facility. You will also see that the accountability and transparency systems in Africa is blocking as a lot of funds from accessing to the countries. And they say that Africans does not submit bankable projects, but then when we try to submit a project where we can actually have the knowledge and capabilities too, they say it's a small project and it doesn't worth it to be financed, so they take the finance to somewhere else. We also always demand having treatment where special consideration doesn't always fit what we are thinking of. And some of key issues for us as young people is the inclusivity of the people. Also, when we talk in a higher level, for example, the negotiations, a lot of things need to be more clarified. For example, of the mitigation. So if we counted how much is emitting, it's 3.2% of the global emissions of the greenhouse gases. If you take out Egypt, South Africa, and recently Nigeria, the whole African continent drops to 1%. So you have to divide what 1% over for 52 countries or 51 countries of Africa. Things are really complicated, and when we try to analyze why we're having this issue, is for me it's pure racism. Until now we are witnessing a lot of changes because of the climate change and a lot of extreme weathers, yet of the industrial countries are still emitting very high, and all of that because they think they have a privilege in order to emit without sequences or without being punished for what they are emitting on the universe. And then, for example, if a hurricane happened in USA, then USA can rebuild the village damaged from the hurricane or whatever in 2 or 3 months is maximum, because they actually have the ability to do that. But in Sudan, we witnessed floods almost every 2 years or every 3 years whenever we have a heavy rain, and it takes to rebuild the villages. That if the villages was rebuilt from the first place, we can just things can stay as they are for many years, and then you will have more homeless people, more poor people, and more vulnerable people. The Industrial Revolution started over the colonialism raw materials. So if we talked about the clothes industry, then they took the cotton from countries like Sudan, for example, and Egypt. And if we talked about steel and other raw materials, they are still taking these raw materials from countries like the diamond from Sierra Leone and the coconut from Ghana and other countries, and then they manufacture it there. They get the added value and economical situation, and we get the effects and the impacts from climate change. So for me, climate justice is not only about how much emitting and how much adapting to the climate change. It's about how countries and how people are dealing with each other's in general. And if we really talking about being in one position, then we really need to shift a lot of things and do a lot of positive, unfortunately, positive discrimination, and sometimes equity requires that. So I'm sure most of you saw the picture where you have people watching the football game, and if we are talking about equality, then if I give the short person 3 boxes, will only it needs to give the to be able to see the match, yet give the tall person no boxes because the tall person doesn't need a box to watch the match anyway. Trying to analyze different point of views, different ideas, and I was only talking about equity and climate justice between countries and between continents, but I haven't touched yet the equity and climate justice between generations. So if the previous generation emitted more than 1% and we can only live until 1.5%, then our generation only emit 0.4% more to stay within the 1.5. So if we emitted the 4%, 0.4, not 4, 0.4%, then what else left to the coming generations? And I'm not sure what kind of planet they will live in. I'm not sure what kind of ecosystem they will have. And I'm very much afraid that the scientific fictions movies that talks about biological war that will force people to live under the ground, not that will actually become a truth. I'm very worried, and I'm sure that many of other females and males also are worried about the future generations, especially if they are considering having kids. So shall I bring a kid to uncertain world that can end up into a hell, actually? And how much left for them to grow and to discover more new ways to live their lives. I will stop here, hoping that everyone can think that if you are in Siberia or you are in South Africa, or if you are in the Antarctic or in Sudan, we are the same people, and we need to think that we have only one planet to live together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nisreen. This was an excellent presentation. You mentioned a lot of interesting topics that we could keep discussing here for a long time. I have a few questions by myself, but I have here a question from our audience that I want to share with the three of you, so you can, each one of you can comment on that. So we have voices here on this panel that bring a very harsh faced by African communities. They are wars, divided countries, long processes of civil war, apartheid, genocides, famine, desertification. Clearly, colonization has left a legacy of pain for Africa. Thinking solutions for climate justice in Africa would not be to speak of retribution of a distributive justice model. Can you comment on that? Deon, do you want to start, please?
Can you repeat the last two sentences from that question about the retributive justice?
A distributive justice model.
So are they asking, what's the question exactly? Because I missed that.
If this is a possible solution for all the issues you're facing in Africa.
Right. I would probably start to say that Africa's history is very complex, and it's not so simple for us to have a one solution that fits all. I kind of like listened to what they said. They mentioned things like genocide, and all of the colonial gifts that were bequeathed more or less by the masters of the past. And one can also agree, like for me in Namibia, we would also be the first country to experience genocide, actually, before it would then later be emulated in the Second World War, during the Nazi-led government of the previous German Empire. But talking about distributive justice, I would like to maybe argue and support that by saying we're looking for more restorative justice, because most of these issues that have just been mentioned are still not solved for us. And Africa is still facing a lot of violences, if I can call it that. And that is one of the reasons why you see a continent that has almost, what, 1 billion people is always left behind by other continents that have not too far from that 2 billion, 3, and yet you wonder how Africa, with all of her resources and all of her manpower, is still unable to foster a system that benefits everybody. So yes, there's pretty much an opportunity to look into how justice can be equitably distributed, because we also have inequalities within amongst ourselves. We are not saying we are saints, but the manner in which our system used to work was that at least we made sure somebody has something that they can call their own. Because even till now, Namibia would have, our country is about 800,000 square kilometers large, right? With 2 million people, but a lot of our people are still living in informal settlements and shacks, and you can imagine what this means for the environment, because the brown spaces are now going to get under pressure, because people have to cut away the trees, people have to find ways for sanitation, and pollution facilities are often not as much available because you're in an informal part of town. And when you go to the rural side, there's almost little development, as Nisreen had argued, that there was inherited wealth from apartheid that has never been redistributed back in a just manner. And I would like to highlight, for example, tourism industry for us at home. It's a sector that is not necessarily also within our hands. It is a privatized sector, and we can argue and question how this particular sector came into the hands of the minority few after apartheid. You'd realize that even the basic income from our resources, we don't get a lot back, except the example I mentioned of the community-based natural resource management, which is a good idea, but it's really much not looking into transforming the lives of people. It's just looking into keeping people alive. just so that you have something to eat and you're there, but you really don't expand beyond. Yes, in terms of redistributing justice, I would like to argue that the people, should be at the table negotiating for that justice. Because even if you talk about genocide, it is negotiated at international courts. If you talk about desertification, climate change, it's negotiated outside of the country. So the voice of the local who is impacted directly is being spoken on behalf of by others. And not to say there's a misinterpretation in the communication or dissemination of that particular information, but there is an experience that is lacking there. And I'd like to borrow then from our South African colleague who emphasized on metaphysics and spirituality. Because as Africans, when we lost our spiritual connection with the environment is when you would see the unintended consequences of that, like corruption would come around, because ethics are very important. Integrity and ethics is something that's lacking largely within the environmental space, because we are looking at it from a human point of view and what the environment can do for us, and not looking at it from what necessarily we can do for the environment, because it also has quite a lot of benefits for us. So yeah, I'd maybe answer it like that and give my colleagues an opportunity. But I very much agree that we have a concoction of past world injustices that have found themselves within our continent. And the toughest part of it is that it's like the rest of the world doesn't wants us to just pack our bags and move on. They're like, that's in the past, so you shouldn't worry about that. But we can't solve climate change if we don't solve racism. It is just impossible to do so. So at a point in time, we are just storing a lot of unnecessary challenges for future generations that they will have to deal with. And the young people are not really racist. Young people we have been brought up inclusive, But if we don't solve it, you're gonna force those who come from a particular background to fight for where they come from, and that might split us further, which is arguing if they don't correct these injustices of race, the pressure will go to the leaders of the nations. And the leaders themselves, for me, don't have the capacity to really solve our challenges, as Nisreen mentioned, from technology to finances. So exactly, and what exactly are we going to do? Will we see a new rise, a new movement of people from these spaces coming together to form stronger coalitions so that they can actually foster a future for themselves? Yeah, so that's my point. I'm very much interested in the restorative that actually restores a little bit of what was there, and as opposed to complementary gestures like grants and stuff. I think what Africans really want is acknowledgement of our role in the world. If you talk about architectural history, if you talk about philosophical history, you mention any subject, you would find literature of Africa, but we don't even have our libraries. My colleague Nisreen is in Sudan. She's not too far from Mali, where Timbuktu and these guys were. And yet the African youth is not growing up with that literature. We don't have access to this knowledge. We don't really even understand our connection to the environment, yet we live the closest to the environment. Another issue I can highlight is the CITES, the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species. The whole argument around trying to conserve an animal that is largely populated itself in somebody else's continent. So the Africans feel like we're living with these elephants every day. We understand the pressure that they are putting on us. Yet when we go to these conferences, you'll be told that no, you cannot actually do what you guys are doing. You can't get rid of the elephants. And yet they don't actually understand how it feels to live with the elephants. Maybe it's good if we can create that cross relationship so that they can actually understand that the reason why the elephant and the African are at war is because there's an injustice of access to land and access to resources. There's not enough water. Now we must share with the wildlife. And then you expect us to live in peace. There's just no way. And plus, we don't communicate as we used to do anyways because of what the colonialism has done by disconnecting our spirituality with this wildlife. There was a time in Africa, even today you can find it with the Maasai. we can actually interact with lions. Even down here in my country, the sun, we had ways to communicate with wildlife and not go to war for thousands of years. But today, we can't even keep them as pets. They don't trust us. The relationship has been broken. So restorative justice must go deeper and beyond bread and butter issues. It should go towards restoring the consciousness of the people, the identity of the people been stolen. Because if you restore African identity, you restore natural environmental identity. And if you restore African identity, you somehow restore the rest of the world, because there's no part of that does not have a part of Africa. Starting with Brazil, we could see how from the Benguela side, they came this side, and then they would move towards Brazil's continent or the South American continent, and they would have a lot of people work for them. And if you go to other parts of the world, you'd find that African is influencing there. So I think that's the true element of this whole, or the quintessential element of this whole discussion, is that when you talk about race, especially you're talking about humans trying to restore them, because it's only those guys who are still connected to the ways of the past and how we used to live, and not necessarily looking at it from destroying the planet. And we are worried even. People are planning to go to Mars, right? And you're like, wait a minute. You guys want to go to Mars, but we haven't even fixed a basic structure of where we live. We are still vulnerable to basic things like mudslides and floods, It doesn't rain, we might starve, and yet there's a whole group that wants to go to Mars. So it shows you how there's a chance that the restoration issue might be left up to us, the locals ourselves, and those who are responsible might find a way to scapegoat. So for us as the young generation, we cannot let that happen. We have to show that we restore something of ourselves again. So I'll answer it like that, but that's a very good point that individual has raised.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Deon, for bringing again the issue about connection with nature. Speaking of that, I remember the things that Mphatheleni shared with us previously. So I would like to come back to Mphatheleni asking about the role of women. The women how they would like to communicate, to teach to women around the world. So how do you see, and I also include Nisreen in this question, how do you see the role of women fighting injustice, climate change impacts, and how they are being empowered? How can we transform women to be more participative on decision-making processes? And how can we empower other vulnerable groups as well as children? Can we start with Mphatheleni, and then Nisreen can join us as well?
Africa is suffering, is in pain, because from the experience which I have been in, we are suffering because this colonizing mind has removed Africa to accept herself. I call Africa herself. And in an indigenous ways, the origin of our ancestors, the spirituality, the food system, the whole governance was based on men. As here in VhaVenda, spiritual processes are not done. All the prayers, all the process from preparation and clan, the people gathered to do the process of rituals, of prayers, of all ceremonies to the spirituality are done by a woman whom ourselves, VhaVenda, we call her Makazi. Makazi meaning the moon, that on the sky. And when colonization comes here, they first come with the taking away what African have. And when they are unable to take it away, they bring missionaries because they see Africans are more connected to the Creator, whom we can call Creator God, but as VhaVenda we call Musiki. Musiki meaning the Creator. And they see that the connection through spirituality to the Creator is processed by women who follow all the respect which they have according to their indigenous ways. Then they bring missionaries so that they erase that, they cancel that, they put the church. And the church, they put a man as a priest. And they say, women are not allowed to pray there in the church. Everything is done by men. And they put a church also and remove people from sacred sites because they've seen that men are the spiritual guidance in the sect for they do processes. Then they honor our spirituality and they said is unchristian. We will go to hell if we go through that way of spirit. And the food system is in the hands of women, from the seed selection, from storing those seeds, from going to plant, from harvesting, from preparing all the food system and storing again those seeds. Women play more role than a man. And they come and erase that and make us to depend on their new way of food system. They erase the woman role. The governance system, like here in VhaVenda, we have traditional leaders, Kosi, traditional leaders. Traditional leaders here in VhaVenda, even they are the men, but when they are put on the throne to become a leader, everything is done by the woman, the Makazi. Even when he sits there on the throne, Makazi is the one who places him on the throne. And Makazi is the one who assists him to lead. Without Makazi here in VhaVenda, a chief or traditional leader cannot work. Then they replace this traditional leader by removing them from their culture, from their tradition, and they make offices for them that they should work according to the constitution. And there is no woman who will be there next to them. They go there to the office and they put the wage to them that they will get salaries. That's why they don't want women near them. And this is how they disconnect the role of women in the whole thing. Coming back to what has for Africa, Maslow hierarchy of needs. It makes African to be frustrated, to be in pain, and to be looked that they are in poverty. Those Maslow hierarchy of needs, they didn't even show the baseline that there is women role. And these needs, they were also needs which have been disconnected from nature. I will emphasize much about the indigenous forest because we have nature. We cannot have nature without indigenous forest. And when we say nature, we are not meaning the trees and plants. Indigenous forest is a bowel of everything because even the precipitation, even the moon, even the ecological calendar, starting from when the moon is moving up there at the sky, which we call Makazi moon. It needs the indigenous forest that it communicates. There is communication until the clouds, until the mist, until the condensation comes and rain comes. And those processes are done by women when they do the spiritual processes for the moon to communicate and bring rain. And the chief is sitting in the office and earning salary. He does not want women. He does not want Makazi. He feels that Makazi is disturbed. That's how Africa become being changed not to accept herself, not welcoming herself, welcoming other ideas that me. And it's not about my tradition. It's not about my spirituality. It's not about the community. It's about me becoming a leader and becoming that I overpower women. This is what Africa has been taught because before the people were living according to what I was explaining about as a good order. A well-being was there. There was order. Even the children, they listened to their parents. Even the adult, the teenagers, they go to the places where they pass through the rite of passage. These new ideas of colonizing and also missionary, which came with the religion that criticized that system, it made Africa to move original Africa and want to welcome the new way. That's why I'm saying even those hierarchy of needs, they didn't look at that. They have concentrated on changing the mind, colonizing the mind of Africans that welcome another thing. Like now, to be listened today, you have to have any education, you have to have a master's, you have to have a what they call doctorate, that you have papers. But if you say an elder woman who is more than maybe 80 years can't give a speech which can be recognized even in many places, because they will say they recognize the thesis of the one who wrote and who has wrote, making reference to other books, literary review. They recognize that data which has been collected from elders because it has to be supported by the others who write. And this is how those, they don't want to listen or to pay attention on this order which has been placed by removing the role of women. That's why even when English disc, it said Mother Earth, while we vendors we say Makazi, and woman is the one whom the Creator has put everything responsibility. Even man comes from the womb of a woman to become a boy, to become a man, to become a father. But that base, that taproot is not recognized by Africans. That's why today Africans, they undermine women. We're hearing much about the women abuse. We are hearing much about that there is need to empower women. How, in which way can we empower women? Because women's strength is not that you teach here. It really get in the woman from the creator, from what makes her, what makes even the earth to be Mother Earth. This is how I see. And I will emphasize this. Until Africa become liberated on is when the order will come back. But Africa, as long as Africa is adopting and making that the religion which spirituality ways which does not come from African spirituality, it will suffer. We will suffer. Generation after generation will be frustrated, will be looked as poverty people. And like presently, we are said we are in poverty. But if you go to what they call rural area, you will find a homestead which has 7 children, a grandmother, a father, a mother, who depend on the household farming in the cultivated land. They are not suffering by hunger. They are still living in that way. But if you go to the suburb, to the urban area, a family where there is a father, a mother, and 2 children, if they don't have money, like now we in this COVID-19, they suffer because they have to money. But like me here, many vendor people here, we are not in poverty, because women, they know that food comes from the soil, and they know how to store food, and they know how to make food to be there, because they know, and this knowledge, this strength, this thinking, when Africa was created by the creator, place this on the hands of women. And through spirituality, when we continue with that, then the path open. We get our needs. Just Makazi to just do spirituality when a baby is sick. A baby get healed when Makazi just go outside and take some roots, or press the totem of from the sacred site and praise those words, and the order comes there, and the baby get healed. Like the herbs, more knowledge is with the elder women. Finally, women are recognized that we do not have to stand up, because colonization saw that the spirituality of Africa, because it's the bottom taproot of African life, they decolonize the mind, even our fathers, our brothers, the sons, the boys, that you have to dominate woman. That was the thing which colonizers did, and they bring Christianity to undermine that, because they see women are naturally what I have mentioned.
Mphatheleni, thank you very much for this powerful message. I think that we as women from African countries or Brazil, we have a lot of work to do, but I truly believe in this young generation. So please, Nisreen, would you please comment on women empowerment in Sudan?
Did you hear me?
Yes, we are. Nisreen will start her final speech, Mphatheleni, and after that, Nisreen, you have 5 minutes, because we have to finish this panel in 5 minutes. So please share with us your thoughts. Nisreen, we can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Yes,
I think
I'm very proud to say that the revolution we had starting December 2018, ending May, or actually June 2018, was mainly held on women's shoulders. So whenever straight outside, whenever we have a march, then most of the marching or demonstrating population are female. When we talk about how much effects the females did, then it's the biggest effect. And I'm sure that most of you saw the picture of the Sudanese young lady standing up and talking to demonstrators, wearing her white top, our traditional dress. And I'm sure that in the new system and the upcoming days, women will have their own place. And unfortunately, Sudan went the opposite side when we talk about women's rights. For example, we have the first female in the parliament in 1960s, and then we had the equal pay since the 60s also between females and males. We had the maternity leave for newborn babies and the mother also from the 60s. So when we talk about the history of the Sudanese country, females were very advanced, and then we went to the opposite side. I'm very sure that also women will lead up the climate action, and then they will also make that.
your sound again.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, now it's back. No. We can't hear you, Nisreen, again. No, we can't hear. I think you put something in the microphone.
Okay, how about
Yes.
now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yes. So I'm sure that women will actually fulfill the ambition to reach the net zero emissions from CO2 and the climate ambition, because we understand, as my previous colleague from South Africa, we understand the connection between the nature and the human being. We also have more sensitivity, and we feel others more than our half, the other half actually. And I'm very sure that with the right political will and the right leadership, females and women will do a lot of good things in the planet in the whole and in countries individually.
So thank you very much, Nisreen. Unfortunately, we are reaching the end of our dialogue. I would love to keep talking with the three of you. For me, it was a great chance to know more about the challenges African countries are facing and its complexity. I really hope we have chances in the future for more collaboration. I would like to say thank you very much for Mphatheleni, Deon, and Nisreen. It has been a great honor to talk to you. I now invite our audience to stay with us and to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can follow all the conference program. For more information, please check our websites that are listed below in the description at YouTube. The next panel starts at 5:20 and will count on Eric Parrado and Rodrigo Echecopar as speakers, and they will talk about green recovery and regional development and the challenges to overcome inequality, poverty, and climate change in Latin America. Thank you very much. Stay home, stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Minerar na Amazônia é lapidar uma joia preciosa, joia que está embaixo do solo e sobre ele. Em plena Amazônia brasileira, a Alcoa desenvolve um projeto de mineração sustentável, da lavra do minério até a reabilitação das áreas, produzir bauxita de alta qualidade, superar todos os desafios e estabelecer um legado de sustentabilidade na Amazônia.
O novo coronavírus é um desafio. E a tecnologia da Petrobras pode ajudar muito neste momento. Nossos cientistas e nossa rede de parceiros estão buscando incansavelmente soluções rápidas para prevenção e tratamento. Redirecionamos a capacidade de processamento de 2 supercomputadores para a pesquisa de combate à doença. Juntos, nossa energia fica mais forte